Blood stained the claws of Talon, the hulking reptilian Mizarian, mute testament to the slaughter he'd rained upon human worlds, but today he begged their aid. Desperation etched deep lines into his scaled face as he faced the human soldiers in the dimly lit briefing room aboard the Mizarian flagship MFS Solaris. The tense atmosphere coiled around the room's occupants, Jason Adams and his 9 battle-hardened comrades, humanity's deadliest weapons. "The insectoid Kreldak have seized our research station on Xenos Prime," Talon began, his gruff voice tinged with veiled despair. "They now control a prototype weapon capable of exterminating entire systems. Without it, the Mizarians, and all sapient life, will perish under their ruthless domination." His piercing yellow gaze swept over the humans, a glimmer of reluctant respect flickering within. "Your species' savagery in combat is legendary. It sickens me to admit, but you are our sole hope. Infiltrate the station, secure the weapon, unleash your human brutality, and may the stars have mercy on us all." Jason's jaw tightened, a dark resolve settling in his gut as the weight of the galaxy's fate pressed upon his shoulders. The scars of his troubled past throbbed, whispering of the sacrifices to come. But he'd bled for humanity before, and he'd bleed again. Failure was not an option. The Kreldak would learn to fear humanity's wrath, even if it cost Jason everything. The galaxy's salvation would be drenched in blood and built upon the bones of Terran warriors. Such was the burden of mankind, forever cleaning up these aliens' messes. The briefing concluded. "You have 12 hours to prepare," Talon said. 12 hours? Jason stared at Talon, a silent challenge in his eyes. 12 hours before his team would plunge into the unknown, risking everything for a species that had once been their enemy. But Jason knew the stakes. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and he would do whatever it took to ensure the mission's success. The Mizarian led the humans through the winding corridors of the MFS Solaris, the ship's metal walls pressing in on them like a suffocating embrace. They entered a cramped armory, where racks of unfamiliar weapons and technology lined the walls. "This is Zephyr," Talon said, gesturing to a young Mizarian soldier. "He will guide you through our equipment." Jason eyed the Mizarian weapons with skepticism. He had fought countless battles with his own tried-and-true gear, and the thought of relying on alien technology made his skin crawl. As Zephyr began his explanation, Jason interrupted. "We'll stick with our own weapons," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Zephyr's scales rippled with annoyance. "Our technology is far superior to your primitive—" "I said we'll stick with our own weapons," Jason repeated, his tone icy. The tension in the room thickened. Lieutenant Mike Thompson, Jason's longtime friend and second in command, stepped forward, attempting to defuse the situation. "Let's focus on the mission," he said, placing a hand on Jason's shoulder. "We're all on the same side here." Jason relented, but the unease in his gut only grew. As the team began to prepare, he noticed Talon and other high-ranking Mizarians engaged in hushed conversations, their eyes darting towards the humans with a mix of suspicion and something else Jason couldn't quite place. His instincts screamed at him, warning him that something was amiss. He pulled Sergeant Chris O'Neill aside, his voice low. "O'Neill, I need you to dig into the Mizarians' true intentions. Something doesn't add up." As the hours ticked by, Jason's unease festered like an open wound. He watched his team, wondering if he was leading them into a trap. The weight of the impending mission pressed down on them all, the atmosphere in the armory growing increasingly tense. Jason made a silent vow to himself. He would uncover the truth behind the Mizarians' motives, no matter the cost. He would protect his team, even if it meant sacrificing everything. The galaxy's fate rested on their shoulders, and failure was not an option. The clock ticked down, and the darkness waited, ready to swallow them whole. The team boarded the Mizarian stealth shuttle, the MSS Shadow, shoulders tense and eyes wary. Jason stepped inside, the dimly lit interior feeling more cramped and oppressive than he'd anticipated. The human soldiers took their seats, the click of harnesses echoing in the confined space. Zephyr and Raxus, the Mizarian pilot, busied themselves with pre-flight checks, their scaled hands dancing across unfamiliar controls. Jason settled into his seat next to Mike, leaning close to his friend. "Something's not right," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. "The Mizarians are hiding something." Mike nodded, his eyes scanning the shuttle's interior. "I noticed inconsistencies in the mission briefing. They're not telling us everything." As the shuttle lifted off, the deck vibrating beneath their feet, Chris caught Jason's attention. He discreetly held up a data pad, the screen casting a faint glow on his face. Jason leaned in, his eyes widening as he read the information Chris had gathered. The Mizarians had been experimenting with a highly unstable and dangerous energy source known as dark matter. The realization hit Jason like a punch to the gut. The prototype weapon they were tasked with recovering likely utilized this volatile substance. The shuttle exited the MFS Solaris, the stars stretching into lines as they entered hyperspace. The journey to Xenos Prime was tense, the team huddled together, their voices low as they discussed their findings. "We need to proceed with caution," Jason said, his eyes meeting those of his comrades. "Keep a close eye on our Mizarian allies. We don't know what they're really after." As the shuttle dropped out of hyperspace near Xenos Prime, Raxus's voice crackled over the intercom. "We'll be landing in a remote area, a few clicks from the research station. Should help us avoid detection." The shuttle descended through the planet's atmosphere, the view outside the small portholes revealing a desolate, rocky landscape shrouded in an eerie, greenish mist. Jason felt a chill run down his spine, a sense of foreboding settling in his gut. The shuttle touched down with a gentle thud, and the team quickly disembarked, weapons at the ready. Jason took point, his senses heightened, every nerve on high alert. They began their trek towards the research station, the mist swirling around them like a living entity. An unsettling silence hung in the air, broken only by the crunch of their boots on the rocky ground. Each step felt like a countdown to an unknown horror, a darkness waiting to swallow them whole. Little did they know, the true nightmares that awaited them had yet to be revealed. Jason and his team crept through the eerie mist, the twisted silhouettes of the research station looming ahead. As they approached, the telltale signs of recent conflict came into focus. Scorch marks marred the walls, windows lay shattered, and the lifeless remains of Mizarian and Kreldak soldiers littered the ground, their bodies contorted in unnatural poses. Jason held up a closed fist, signaling the team to take cover behind a large, jagged boulder. He turned to Zephyr, his voice low. "We need to scout ahead, see what we're up against." Zephyr nodded, his scales rippling with apprehension. Together they edged forward, peering around the boulder. A group of Kreldak soldiers patrolled the station's perimeter, their insectoid bodies encased in chitinous armor. Their compound eyes glinted in the dim light, reflecting an otherworldly menace. Jason and Zephyr retreated to the team's position, crouching low. "We've got a problem," Jason said, his brow furrowed. "The place is crawling with Kreldak." Chris leaned forward, his voice hushed. "I might have a solution. The Mizarians have cloaking devices that could get us past the guards undetected." Mike shook his head. "Too risky. We need a diversion, draw them away from the entrance." Jason considered the options, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. After a moment he spoke. "We'll do both. Chris, you and Zephyr use the cloaking device, slip inside and disable the security systems. The rest of us will create a distraction. Buy you some time." As Chris and Zephyr prepared the cloaking device, Jason and the others checked their weapons, a mix of human and Mizarian technology. They exchanged grim looks, the gravity of the situation etched into their faces. With a nod from Jason, they launched their surprise attack. Plasma bolts and bullets tore through the misty air, catching the Kreldak off guard. The insectoid warriors returned fire, their plasma rifles casting an eerie glow across the battlefield. Jason and his team took cover, engaging in a fierce firefight. The air sizzled with energy, the stench of scorched flesh and melted metal filling their nostrils. They fought with a desperate intensity, knowing that failure meant not only their own deaths, but the doom of countless worlds. Meanwhile, Chris and Zephyr, cloaked in shimmering invisibility, slipped past the chaos and into the station. The corridors stretched before them, dimly lit and eerily silent. They followed the schematics provided by Talon, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. As they neared the central control room, the distant sounds of battle reached their ears, a reminder of the sacrifices their comrades were making. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the air, followed by a deafening silence. Chris and Zephyr froze, their hearts hammering in their chests. They exchanged worried glances, the unspoken question hanging between them. What horrors lay in wait, lurking in the shadows of the station? The scream echoed in their minds, a chilling promise of the nightmares to come. Chris and Zephyr stepped into the central control room, their weapons raised, only to stop dead in their tracks. The room was in shambles, consoles smashed, wires ripped from walls, sparks sputtering from broken panels. A dark, viscous substance was splattered across the walls, glistening sickly in the emergency lighting. In the center of the room lay the contorted body of a Mizarian scientist, his face frozen in a rictus of pure terror, eyes bulging and mouth agape in a silent scream. Chris rushed to the scientist's side, pressing fingers to his neck to check for a pulse, but the cold, rigid flesh told him it was far too late. Zephyr, scales rippling with shock, made his way to the functioning consoles, his clawed hands shaking as he worked to disable the station's security. Chris tore his gaze from the dead Mizarian and began searching the room, looking for anything that could shed light on the horrors that had unfolded. Amidst the debris, a partially damaged datapad caught his eye. He picked it up, wiping away the dark substance obscuring the screen, and began to read the fragmented entries. His eyes widened as he scrolled through the information, a cold dread settling in his gut. The Mizarians hadn't just been experimenting with dark matter for the prototype weapon. They'd been trying to create a mind control device, something capable of enslaving entire species. Chris felt bile rising in his throat as he read on, the full extent of the Mizarians' sinister intentions becoming clear. "Zephyr," he called out, his voice hoarse, "you need to see this." The young Mizarian looked up from the console, his eyes meeting Chris's. He crossed the room, taking the datapad from Chris's outstretched hand. As he read, his scales turned a sickly grey, his eyes widening in horror. I had no idea," Zephyr whispered, his voice trembling. "My own people. I can't believe they would do something so vile." He looked up at Chris, a fierce determination burning in his eyes. "I'll help you expose the truth, what they've done here. It's unforgivable." Suddenly a low guttural growl emanated from the shadows, sending chills down their spines. Chris and Zephyr spun around, weapons at the ready, as a creature emerged from the darkness. It was a Kreldak, but not like any they'd seen before. Its exoskeleton was warped and twisted, pulsing with an unnatural energy. Glowing, malevolent red compound eyes fixed on them, and a corrosive black fluid dripped from its mandibles, sizzling as it hit the floor. The abomination lunged at them, its movements erratic and unnatural. Chris and Zephyr opened fire, plasma bolts and bullets tearing through the air, but the creature seemed to shrug off the hits, its mutated exoskeleton absorbing the impacts. They realized with growing horror that the dark matter experiments hadn't just created a deadly weapon. They'd transformed the Kreldak into something far more terrifying, a nightmare made flesh. As they fought for their lives, dodging the creature's vicious attacks and watching in disbelief as their weapons proved ineffective, Chris and Zephyr could only hope that Jason and the others would reach them in time. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and the true depths of the horrors unleashed on Xenos Prime were only just beginning to reveal themselves. Jason, Mike, and the rest of the team battled on against the Kreldak forces outside the research station. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, the acrid stench of burnt chitin and singed flesh assaulting their nostrils. As they fought, a strange shift in the enemy's tactics caught Jason's attention. The Kreldak soldiers began to retreat, their movements erratic and disorganized, as if guided by an unseen puppeteer. "Something's not right," Jason muttered, his brow furrowed. He signaled for the team to advance cautiously, his instincts screaming that danger lurked in the shadows. As they pushed forward, the team stumbled upon a gruesome sight. Scattered across the rocky terrain lay the twisted corpses of Kreldak soldiers, their exoskeletons warped and deformed, reminiscent of the nightmarish creature Chris and Zephyr had encountered inside the station. Mike knelt beside one of the fallen Kreldak, his eyes narrowing as he examined the body. "Jason, take a look at this," he called out, his voice tinged with a mixture of fascination and horror. Attached to the Kreldak's armor were strange, glowing canisters, their contents pulsing with an eerie, dark energy. Mike carefully removed one of the canisters, holding it up for Jason to see. "Dark matter," Mike whispered, realization dawning on his face. The Kreldak have been using it to enhance their soldiers. Jason's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of information they had gathered. The Mizarians and the Kreldak had both been experimenting with dark matter, each side desperate to gain the upper hand in their bloody conflict. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the research station, the ground beneath their feet trembling as debris rained down around them. Jason's heart leapt into his throat, fear gripping him as he thought of Chris and Zephyr, still trapped inside the station. "Move!" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. The team surged forward, navigating through the smoke and rubble, their weapons at the ready. As they neared the entrance, they were met with a sight that chilled their blood. More mutated Kreldak soldiers emerged from the shadows, their bodies pulsing with the same unnatural energy that had warped their fallen comrades. The team fought their way through the horrors, their weapons barely holding back the onslaught. Plasma bolts tore through twisted exoskeletons, the air thick with the stench of death and the crackle of dark energy. At last they reached the central control room, bursting through the shattered doorway. Inside they found Chris and Zephyr, battered and exhausted but alive, surrounded by the twisted remains of the mutated Kreldak soldier they had fought. Chris, clutching a damaged datapad, his face grim, quickly filled Jason in on their chilling discovery. "The dark matter experiments," he panted, his voice hoarse. "They were trying to create a mind control device, something to enslave entire species." Jason's blood ran cold, the true scope of the conspiracy unfolding before him. The Mizarians and the Kreldak had unleashed a horror that threatened not only their own races, but the entire galaxy. As the team caught their breath, a deep rumbling sound emanated from the depths of the station, the walls shaking with an ominous intensity. A sense of dread washed over them, the realization that their fight was far from over. Somewhere in the shadows, the true mastermind behind the dark matter experiments lurked, waiting to reveal themselves. And as the team stood amidst the carnage, the weight of the galaxy's fate pressing down upon them, they knew that the nightmares unleashed on Xenos Prime were only the beginning. The team moved deeper into the research station, their weapons held at the ready, nerves stretched to the breaking point. The only sound was their footsteps echoing off the metal walls, the silence oppressive and heavy with dread. They entered a vast chamber, dimly lit by flickering, failing lights, shadows pooling in every corner. In the center of the room loomed a towering machine, alien and ominous, its surface pulsing with an eerie dark energy. Thick cables snaked from the machine to rows of containment units lining the walls, each one housing a hideously mutated Kreldak soldier suspended in murky liquid. Jason approached the machine cautiously, Chris and Zephyr at his side. Up close, the machine thrummed with malevolent power, the air around it crackling with barely contained energy. They studied the control panels and displays, trying to make sense of the alien technology. "This is it," Chris said, his voice hushed. "The source of the dark matter experiments, and that mind control device is built right into the machine." Zephyr nodded grimly. "We have to find a way to shut it down before—" A holographic projection flickered to life above the machine, cutting him off. The wavering blue image resolved into a cloaked figure, its face obscured by deep shadows. "Welcome, intruders," the figure said, its voice distorted and inhuman. I am Nexus, the architect of this glorious endeavor. Jason stepped forward, his grip tightening on his weapon. Why are you doing this? What do you want? Nexus laughed, a grating metallic sound. You simple-minded fools. The Mizarians and Kreldak were merely pawns in my grand design. This war was nothing more than a means to an end, a way to perfect my creation. The figure gestured to the machine, the containment units. The dark matter experiments were never about creating a mere weapon. No, my goal was far more ambitious, to create a device that could control the minds of entire species, bend them to my will. As Nexus spoke, a hiss of releasing pressure filled the chamber. The containment units began to open one by one, viscous liquid spilling out onto the floor. The mutated Kreldak soldiers twitched and stirred, their glowing red eyes snapping open, fixed on the team with predatory focus. And now, Nexus said, you will witness the fruits of my labor firsthand. These enhanced specimens linked to my machine obey my every command, and they will be the first of many. The abominations lurched forward, their movements jerky and unnatural, advancing on the team with single-minded purpose. Jason reacted instantly, barking orders to his squad. The chamber erupted into chaos, the air filled with the deafening roar of weapons fire and the shrieks of the mutated horrors. But the team's weapons seemed to have little effect on the abominations, their twisted flesh absorbing the rounds, knitting back together with horrifying speed. Chris, his face lit by the glow of his datapad, frantically scanned the machine's schematics. There, he shouted over the din of battle. The central power core. If we can destroy it, it should shut down the whole system. Jason nodded, his jaw clenched. But reaching the core meant fighting through the horde of mind-controlled abominations, and time was running out. He made a split-second decision, one that could mean life or death for his team. Mike, he yelled, take the rest of the squad, hold off these bastards as long as you can. They fought their way across the chamber, dodging slashing claws and sprays of corrosive acid, the machine looming before them like a malevolent god. But even as they pushed forward, determination driving them on, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that Nexus had one final trick in reserve. The fate of his team, of the galaxy itself, hung in the balance, and the only thing standing between them and annihilation was a desperate gamble, a last-ditch effort to stop the nightmare before it could consume everything. Jason, Chris, and Zephyr battled through the chamber, plasma bolts sizzling past as they ducked and dodged the onslaught of mutated Kreldak soldiers. The power core loomed ahead, pulsing with malevolent energy. Suddenly, a shockwave of dark matter slammed into them, hurling them to the ground. Nexus's hologram shimmered into view above, maniacal laughter reverberating off the metal walls. One last surprise, insects, Nexus sneered. Behold the apex of the dark matter experiments. A hulking abomination lumbered from the shadows, towering over its twisted brethren. Nexus gloated about its concentrated dark matter infusion, rendering it a perfect thrall. The monstrosity lunged, scythe-like claws cleaving the air, the trio scattered, rolling desperately aside. Crouched behind a toppled containment unit, they gulped frantic breaths. Chris scoured the schematics, searching for any weakness. There, a chink in the armor plating, right at the neck vertebrae. Jason and Zephyr nodded grimly. Leaping out, Jason unleashed a hail of gunfire, drawing the creature's baleful glare. It charged, floor quaking under thunderous steps. At the last second, Jason dove aside, barely evading decapitating swipes. Zephyr circled behind, priming a plasma grenade. The explosive latched onto the abomination's back, detonating in a blinding flare. Enraged, it whirled on Zephyr, gnashing its mandibles. Chris sighted down his rifle, aiming for that crucial gap. He squeezed the trigger. The plasma bolt lanced out, puncturing through the weak point and rupturing critical organs. A piercing shriek rent the air as the creature staggered, ichorous fluid spurting from the wound. Seizing his chance, Jason pounced onto its back, combat knife glinting. He plunged the blade deep into the gap, twisting savagely, The abomination thrashed and bucked, but Jason clung fast, knife ripping through alien flesh. With a final rattling hiss, the creature collapsed, Jason rolling clear as it crashed lifelessly to the floor. The three soldiers shakily regrouped, battered and drained, but still determined. At the power core they prepped demolition charges. Nexus hologram flickered back, face contorted with desperation and fury. "Right, I can give you anything, wealth, power, knowledge unimaginable." Jason glared back coldly. "Not interested, you sick bastard. The price is too high." Nexus raged, promising retribution, but Jason tuned the madman out. He glanced at Chris and Zephyr, giving a tight nod. As one, they aimed their weapons at the core, fingers tightening on triggers. It was time to end this nightmare, once and for all. Jason aimed his weapon at the pulsating power core, finger tightening on the trigger. Suddenly the entire chamber shook violently, nearly knocking him off balance. The machine crackled with wild energy, dark tendrils snaking across its surface in erratic patterns. Nexus's hologram flickered, distorting grotesquely. Fear and rage battled across his fractured visage. "Fools! The failsafe!" Nexus snarled. "Destroy the core, and you'll trigger a cataclysmic dark matter explosion, obliterating this station and every planet for light years." Jason, Chris, and Zephyr traded alarmed looks, the terrible realization sinking in. Destroy the machine, stop Nexus's insanity, but at the cost of billions of innocent lives. The room lurched again, supports groaning, bulkheads buckling. The destabilizing machine was tearing the station apart. "We're out of time," Jason barked, mind racing. "Chris, Zephyr, get back to the ship, evacuate everyone off Xenos Prime, warn them what's coming." "What about you?" Chris shouted over the din of twisting metal. "I'll stay, try to disable the failsafe. You'll only have seconds to blow the core once it's down. Now go." Torn, Chris and Zephyr hesitated. Leaving Jason behind felt unthinkable. But the station shuddered violently, girders crashing down around them. Thousands of lives hung in the balance. "Go!" Jason roared. With one last anguished look, they turned and sprinted for the hangar, blasting through crumbling hallways choked with rubble and shrieking mutants. Alone, Jason staggered to the failsafe console, the deck pitching beneath his feet. He worked furiously, fingers flying over the keys, fighting through cascading system failures. Nexus lashed out with brutal psionic attacks, invading Jason's brain through the neural link. Agony exploded through his skull, 1,000 icy needles shredding his thoughts. Jaw clenched, Jason fought back, repelling the sadistic mental probes. He poured every ounce of his will into the interface, rewriting code, hunting for weaknesses. The console sparked and smoked under his assault. In the hangar bay, Chris and Zephyr stumbled into the arms of an astonished Mike and the battered squad. "Jason! He stayed behind!" Chris gasped out as they piled aboard the Shadow in a mad scramble. In the crumbling chamber, Jason battled on, nerves on fire, synapses shorting out. The failsafe stubbornly held, his brain feeling like it would burst. Girders collapsed around him, the core pulsing wildly, tearing itself apart. With a final desperate roar, he slammed his fist onto the keys. The console screeched and exploded in a shower of sparks, but the failsafe light winked out. "Chris, now!" Jason screamed into the comm. Chris stabbed the detonator. A sun bloomed in the heart of the station, fire consuming metal, plastic, flesh, vaporizing the abominations, purging the evil. Jason closed his eyes as the flames rushed towards him, his last thoughts of his friends, his team, the lives he'd saved. It was worth it. It was. The blinding flash of the explosion faded, leaving only the twisted wreckage of the research station hanging in the void of space. Mizarian and Kreldak ships converged on the ruins, their scanners probing the debris for any signs of life. Talon stood on the bridge of the MFS Solaris, his eyes fixed on the viewscreen as the remnants of the dark matter machine drifted past, jagged metal and shattered containment units glinting in the starlight. "Sir, we're picking up a faint life sign," a Mizarian officer reported, his voice tense with anticipation. It's coming from an escape pod. Talon leaned forward, his claws digging into the armrest of his command chair. Bring it aboard now. The escape pod was hauled into the Solaris's hangar bay, its hull scorched and dented from the explosion. A team of Mizarian medics rushed forward, prying open the battered hatch. Inside they found the broken form of Jason, his body ravaged by the dark matter energy that had engulfed him in the station's final moments. He's alive, one of the medics said, but barely. We need to get him to the infirmary, Stat. As the medics rushed Jason away, Talon turned to face the Kreldak commander, who had just arrived on the bridge. The insectoid warrior's compound eyes glittered with a mix of suspicion and grudging respect. It seems we have both been played for fools, Talon said, his voice low and grim. Nexus used us all, manipulated us into unleashing this horror upon the galaxy. The Kreldak commander clicked his mandibles, a gesture of agreement. We must put aside our differences. For now, Talon, this threat is greater than our petty squabbles. Talon nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down upon him. Agreed. We will work together to contain this dark matter corruption, to find a way to undo the damage that has been done. In the days that followed, Jason drifted in and out of consciousness, his mind assaulted by fragmented memories of the horrors he had witnessed. The medics worked tirelessly to heal his battered body, but the scars left by the dark matter energy ran deeper than mere physical wounds. When he finally awoke, Jason found himself in a sterile white room, the steady beep of medical equipment filling the air. Talon stood at his bedside, his scaled face etched with a mix of concern and grim determination. Talon hesitated, as if searching for the right words. The dark matter, it's spreading. The explosion, it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Jason struggled to sit up, wincing as pain lanced through his body. What do you mean? The energy released in the explosion, it's infected the nearby planets. Xenos Prime, the other worlds in this sector, they're changing, mutating. It's like nothing we've ever seen before. Jason felt a cold dread settle in the pit of his stomach. He thought of the twisted abominations he had faced in the station, the mind-bending horrors that had haunted his every step. And now those nightmares were spreading, consuming entire worlds. We have to stop it, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. We can't let this happen, not again. Talon placed a clawed hand on Jason's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity. We will, Jason. The Mizarians and the Kreldak, we're working together now. We've established quarantine zones, research outposts. We're going to find a way to beat this thing, no matter the cost. Jason nodded, a grim determination settling over him. He knew that the road ahead would be long and hard, that the horrors he had faced in the station were only the beginning, but he also knew that he couldn't turn his back on this fight, not after everything he had seen, everything he had lost. As he lay back against the pillows, his mind racing with the challenges to come, Jason made a silent vow to himself. He would see this through to the end, no matter the cost. He would find a way to stop the dark matter corruption, to avenge the fallen and save the galaxy from the nightmare that had been unleashed. But even as he made that promise, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered that this was a fight he might not be able to win, that the price of victory might be more than he could bear. The nightmares came for him then, visions of twisted flesh and shattered worlds, of a darkness that consumed everything in its path. And as Jason slipped back into the shadows of unconsciousness, he knew that the true battle was only just beginning. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.